Elena moved quietly through the Kensington house. She carried a small basket of laundry in her arms, her steps soft on the marble floor. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. The house was always filled with voices, but none were for her. She had worked here for almost 5 years, but to them, she was still just the maid. Every morning, she arrived before the sun. She cleaned the kitchen before anyone came downstairs. She folded clothes, scrubbed bathrooms, vacuumed long halls, and wiped fingerprints off glass doors. No one asked how she was, not once. The children passed her like she was air. The parents called her only when something was missing or dirty. She answered with a nod, a polite smile, and went back to work. Elena didn't mind hard work. She was used to it, back in her small hometown. She had helped her mother clean houses. She knew how to make beds tight, how to make floors shine, and how to stay out of the way. But what she never got used to was being invisible. It wasn't the work that made her tired. It was being unseen, unheard, forgotten. One evening, she was in the dining room, setting the table for a dinner party. The guests were dressed well, talking and laughing loudly. As she placed a napkin down, one of the guests whispered something to Mrs. Kensington. Mrs. Kensington laughed and said, "Oh, that's just the maid." Elena heard it, clear as glass. She didn't say anything. She never did. But a small part of her heart quietly folded, like paper. That night, she went home to her tiny room in the basement. She lit a small candle and opened her notebook. It wasn't much, just a cheap-lined book with a soft cover, but it was hers. Inside, she had been writing her thoughts every night. Sometimes small things, what she saw, what she wished someone had said. Sometimes stories from her childhood, but mostly, it was filled with words she had never spoken aloud. That night, she wrote about the dinner party. She wrote, "They laughed like I wasn't there, but I was always there." Then she paused, holding the pen still. She wasn't angry, not really, just tired. Tired of being nothing but a shadow in someone else's life. One of the things she noticed over the years was that people shared secrets when they thought you didn't matter. She had seen tears on the daughter's face after school. She had heard fights between the parents behind closed doors. She knew who was kind, who was pretending, and who was lonely. And still, they never knew anything about her, not her favorite song, not what made her smile, not even her birthday once. The youngest son had dropped his sandwich on the floor and walked away. She had picked it up, cleaned the floor, and left a fresh sandwich on his plate without a word. He never said thank you, no one did, but Elena didn't do it for thanks. She did it because she believed that kindness still mattered, even if no one noticed. That belief is what kept her going. But now, after 5 years of silence, something inside her began to shift. Not in a loud, angry way, just slowly like snow starting to melt. She looked around the home that wasn't hers, filled with people who barely saw her. And for the first time she thought, maybe it's time they did. She didn't want revenge, and she didn't want attention. But she wanted to be remembered. Even just for a moment, not as just the maid, but as a person who had been there. Someone who had worked with care, who had listened, who had quietly helped in ways they never even noticed. So, she began writing something different in her notebook that night. Not just a journal entry, something more, a note, not to scold them, not to shame them, but to show them that she was there all along, and though she didn't know it yet, that note would soon change everything. The next morning, Elena stood in the quiet kitchen. The sun had just begun to rise, and golden light spilled through the window. She warmed the kettle, laid out breakfast items just the way the family liked them, and placed fresh fruit on the long polished counter. The house was still asleep, silent except for the ticking of the clock, but inside her mind, things were beginning to move last night. After writing in her notebook, she had sat in the dark for a long time. No music, no noise, just silence and the soft hum of the old heater in her small room. She stared at the ceiling and thought about what she had written. It wasn't just words anymore. It was truth, her truth, and it needed to be shared. She didn't know how or when, but something inside her whispered that the time was near. Still, she moved through her morning as usual, without a trace of emotion on her face. She folded towels, wiped crumbs, cleaned fingerprints off doorknobs. Even when the children came downstairs, yawning and distracted, she smiled quietly. They didn't speak to her, but she didn't expect them to. She had stopped hoping for kindness a long time ago, but she did notice something different that day. Madeline, the teenage daughter, looked at her for a moment longer than usual, just a second, as if about to say something. But then she turned away. That one moment stayed in Elena's heart longer than it should have. Later that day, Elena went upstairs to dust the bedrooms. As she entered Madeline's room, she saw clothes on the floor, books scattered across the bed, and a soft pink sweater crumpled near the chair. She quietly began tidying. While folding the sweater, she noticed a small tear along the seam. Almost invisible, but there. She didn't say anything. Instead, she took it with her, sewed it back together in the laundry room, and returned it neatly to the chair. This is how she showed love, in silence, through little acts no one ever saw. Elena believed people revealed who they were not in their big speeches, but in the way they treated those they thought didn't matter. And the truth was, the Kensingtons didn't even realize she had a last name. They didn't know her story, her favorite food, her fear of storms, or how much she missed her younger brother back home. Later that evening, the family had guests over again. Elena prepared the dining room, polished the silverware, and lit the tall candles like always. The guests laughed and complimented the beautiful table. Mrs. Kensington smiled and took all the credit. No one mentioned the hands that had arranged every fork and folded every napkin just right. As Elena stepped away from the table, she passed by the kitchen doorway where the youngest son was sitting with a small tablet in his hands. He looked up for a second and said, "You're the one who makes the toast the way I like it, right?" Elena froze, surprised. She gave a gentle nod and smiled. Yes, he didn't say thank you, but that one question stayed with her all night. It was the first time he had looked her in the eyes and said something personal, even if small, back. In her room, she opened her notebook again. The note she had begun was growing. She didn't write it with anger, but with a strange calm in her heart. She was writing to the whole family, not to accuse them, but to remind them that the quietest person in the room often carries the most stories. That just because someone doesn't speak much doesn't mean they have nothing to say. She wrote about mornings when she made their meals with care, even when she was tired. She wrote about the nights she stayed late, cleaning up their messes while they laughed upstairs. She wrote about the birthdays she remembered, the kindness she hoped for, the moments that passed without a single thank you. And she ended it with a line that made her hand tremble slightly. "I have always been here, even when you didn't see me." She placed the pen down and stared at the words. She didn't know what they would do to the family. Maybe they'd be angry, maybe they'd feel nothing, but at least they would know, at least for once. Her voice would be heard, even if only on paper. The note was nearly done, and soon she'd leave it where they'd have no choice but to read it. For now, though, she gently closed the notebook and sat in the stillness of her little room. Outside, the wind whispered against the window, and the world continued on as usual. But something inside her had changed, something quiet but strong. Elena was still just the maid in their eyes, but not for much longer. The next morning felt different. The house was still standing, still clean, still full of sunlight through the windows. But something was off, and everyone felt it. Breakfast wasn't on the table. No one had made the coffee. There were no folded napkins, no fresh orange slices, no warm toast ready by the time the youngest came downstairs, rubbing his eyes. For the first time in years, the family had to move without Elena. The silence in the kitchen wasn't peaceful anymore. It was awkward, unfamiliar. The mother opened a cabinet, then another, trying to find the coffee filters. The father burned the eggs twice. The daughter sat at the table, staring at a cracked plate she had never noticed before. None of them spoke about the note right away. It was still on the kitchen counter. right where the mother had placed it last night. No one dared to throw it away. It just sat there, a piece of paper that somehow felt heavier than anything in the room. Later that day, the daughter walked into the living room and sat next to her father. "Did she ever tell you anything about herself?" she asked softly. He shook his head slowly. "She barely spoke unless we asked her to do something," he said. "She was here every day." The daughter whispered, "And we know nothing." That afternoon, the housekeeper from the next neighborhood stopped by to pick up a borrowed vacuum. She was surprised to hear that Alina had left. "Elena was one of the kindest people I've ever met," she said gently. "She once stayed late to help me clean up after a party at the neighbor's house, even though she didn't have to." The mother stood in the doorway, listening. "She never told us anything," she said quietly. The woman nodded. "She probably didn't think you'd care." Those words stuck. Not in a rude way, just in the kind of way that hurts because it might be true. The daughter went up to her room and opened her desk drawer. Inside was a crumpled tissue, the one someone had left quietly on her dresser a few weeks ago when she'd been crying. She had been too upset to notice who left it, but now she knew, and the smallest tear rolled down her cheek. By evening, the whole family had read the note again. Each person took turns sitting with it, rereading the lines. There was one sentence that kept echoing in their minds. "I was always here, even when you didn't see me." The father stared out the window, watching the wind move through the trees. He was a man who dealt with facts and contracts, always in control. But nothing in his office had ever made him feel this way. He didn't know where she had gone, or if they'd ever see her again. But he knew they had failed someone, not through cruelty, but through something just as bad, indifference. The youngest child asked if Elena was coming back. The mother knelt beside him and said, "I don't think so." "Why?" he asked. She didn't know what to say, so she answered the only way she could. "Because we didn't treat her the way we should have." Later that night, the daughter went online. She searched every corner of social media, trying to find a clue, a name, a picture, a place. She typed in the few things she knew. Housekeeper, soft voice, Elena. Nothing came up. It was like searching for someone who had been erased. She opened a blog and began to write, not because she wanted attention, but because she needed to say something out loud. She wrote about the woman who had worked in their home for 5 years, who had done everything, quietly, gently, and left only one note behind. She didn't name names. She just told the truth. Within a few days, the post was shared thousands of times. People commented things like, "This reminds me of the woman who helped raise me. Thank you for saying this out loud. I've never forgotten the kindness of the housekeeper in our home, even if I never told her." The story began to spread, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, and people understood what it meant to miss someone they never really saw. Back in the house, the family made small changes. They began saying thank you to the man who delivered their groceries. They smiled at the woman who walked their neighbor's dog. They looked up when someone entered the room. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. Elena's note had done something no argument or lecture could do. It had opened their eyes, and for the first time, the family was learning to see. A week had passed. The house was clean, but not like before. It was tidy, but something about it felt empty, like a song that had lost its melody. They tried to carry on, but the space Elena had filled couldn't be replaced with silence. The mother tried to follow the list Elena had left behind. She printed out the schedule, taped it inside the pantry, and set reminders on her phone. But things still slipped through the cracks. The laundry didn't smell the same. The beds didn't have the neat corners Elena always folded just right. The towels were stiff. The kitchen was cold. It wasn't about the work. It was about how it felt. Elena had brought something into that house that no one noticed until it was gone. Warmth. One afternoon, the daughter sat in the sunroom with her laptop. She kept checking the blog posts she had written. More comments, more shares, more stories from strangers. People from different towns, different backgrounds, all talking about someone they once ignored. One comment stood out. I wonder how many people we walk past every day, thinking they don't matter until it's too late. She closed the laptop slowly, feeling her throat tighten. She walked into the kitchen and found the note again, now wrinkled at the corners from so many hands touching it. She read the last line again and again. I was here, even when you didn't see me. That night, the family sat at the dinner table, not in silence, but in reflection. They spoke softly about Elena. The mother admitted she had never even asked her about her life. The father said he couldn't remember if he had ever said thank you. The son asked why she had left without saying goodbye. The daughter answered, because she already knew we wouldn't listen. The next day, they began searching, real searching, not just typing her name online. They went to the local cleaner's shop where Elena once picked up supplies. The man behind the counter remembered her, said she was always kind, never in a rush. They asked if he knew where she'd gone. He didn't. But he remembered her saying she liked to walk by the river on her days off. So the daughter and her mother went there. They walked for hours, looking at every bench, every face, hoping to see someone familiar. But Elena wasn't there. Still, they kept coming back day after day. Not because they were sure she'd appear, but because they felt they owed it to her to try. One day, on the 5th visit, the daughter noticed a small message board near a bookstore. Pinned among event flyers and ads for lost pets was a folded paper with handwriting that looked familiar. She reached out and carefully opened it. It was a note, simple and clean. If you are reading this, maybe you're someone I once knew. I'm doing fine now. I'm working at a place that helps women find jobs and shelter. Kindness is given freely here, not based on status or money. If you're looking for me, thank you. That already means more than you know. The daughter showed it to her mother, tears in both their eyes. It wasn't signed, but they knew it was Elena's. It was her voice, quiet, kind, and gentle like always. They looked at the bottom of the note. A small card was pinned under it. It had the address of a women's center on the other side of town. They didn't rush there right away. They stood by the board for a few more minutes, just breathing. For the first time, they felt like they were seeing her as a person. Not as someone who worked in their home, but as someone who had her own life, her own strength. That evening, the family talked again. This time, they didn't talk about what she had done for them. They talked about who she was. They talked about how her quiet way had left the deepest mark. They decided to write her a letter, not to beg her to come back, but to tell her what they had finally realized. Each member of the family wrote something by hand. The youngest drew a small picture of toast and wrote, I miss how you made it perfect. The daughter wrote, I see you now. The father wrote, you deserved more from us. And the mother, with tears in her eyes, simply wrote, I'm sorry. They placed the letter in an envelope and planned to deliver it to the address on the card, not to fix the past, but to finally acknowledge the truth, that Elena had mattered more than they had ever said. And maybe, just maybe, she would read those words and know she wasn't invisible anymore. The house was quiet after dinner. Elena stood in the hallway, holding a basket of towels. She could hear the low sound of the television in the living room. Laughter, voices, the clink of glasses, the usual. She didn't mind the noise. She had learned to live in the background. That's where they always kept her. Behind the scenes, out of sight. She walked toward the laundry room, passing the front door. She paused for a second, looking at the tall wood and the silver handle. She had walked through that door hundreds of times, but never felt like she belonged. Not really. This wasn't her home. It never had been. Still, she had cleaned it like it was hers, protected it like it was hers. She had cared for people who didn't even know her birthday. Back in the laundry room, she set down the towels and pulled out her notebook. She opened it to the page she had been working on for days now. The note, the one she would leave behind. She reread the lines she had written, slowly, with care. Then she added more. Not with anger, but with truth. Words from someone who had watched in silence for too long. As she wrote, she remembered a moment from the week before. It was raining outside. She had just come back from the store, her clothes soaked, her shoes wet. She had stood at the door, water dripping from her coat. Mrs. Kensington opened it, gave her one cold look and said, "Don't track mud inside," then walked away, no umbrella, no towel. Not even a thank you for carrying in groceries through a storm. That moment had stayed with her. It wasn't the words, it was the way they made her feel invisible, like she didn't deserve warmth or care. But the strange part was, Elena didn't feel bitter, she just felt done. Done with pretending it didn't matter. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "You don't need to be cruel to hurt someone. Sometimes silence is enough." That night, Elena didn't sleep much. She stayed up sewing a button back onto one of Mr. Kensington's shirts. She packed a small bag with her belongings. Not many things, just the essentials, one change of clothes, her notebook, a family photo from her village, and a tiny music player she had bought secondhand. In the morning, she moved like normal. She made breakfast, eggs, toast, fresh juice, exactly how they liked it. She placed the plates carefully, cleaned the counters, and folded napkins the way she always did. No one noticed anything different. No one asked why her eyes looked tired or why her hands were shaking just slightly. As the family sat at the table, Elena stood by the kitchen. They didn't speak to her. They spoke over her, around her. It was like she wasn't even there. But she was. She always was. She heard the way they talked to each other. The jokes, the gossip, the complaints. She had been part of their world, even if they never let her in. After breakfast, when no one was watching, she quietly slipped into the study. She placed the folded note on the desk, just under a small crystal paperweight. It was addressed to no one, because it was meant for all of them. She stepped back, looked at it for a moment, then turned around and left the room. Her steps were steady, her heart calm, in the hallway. She passed the youngest child playing a video game. He didn't look up. She passed Madeline, the teenage daughter, brushing her hair in the mirror. Madeline glanced at Elena, then quickly looked away. Still, Elena gave her a small smile, the kind that didn't need a reply. By the time the clock struck noon, Elena was gone. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't leave a message on her phone. She didn't need to. The note would speak for her. It carried every word she had swallowed for 5 long years. And upstairs, in the quiet study, that note waited patiently, waiting for someone to finally notice it, waiting for someone to finally read her voice. The house moved on that day like it always did. Laughter, phones ringing, doors opening and closing. But something had shifted. They just didn't know it yet. Elena wasn't just the maid. Not anymore. The house felt the same that morning. Clean, quiet, polished like always. Breakfast was served. The mail was brought in. The garden watered by the auto sprinklers. But something was missing. And no one noticed it right away. Not until the youngest son spilled juice and looked around for a cloth. Not until the trash can in the kitchen started to fill up and no one took it out. Not until the folded laundry didn't appear in the hallway like it usually did by noon. Hours passed, and still no one saw it clearly. They assumed Elena was running late. Maybe stuck in traffic. Maybe busy in the laundry room. No one thought to call her, because they never needed to before. She had always just been there, like a clock ticking in the background, but now she wasn't. And the house, without realizing it, had already started to feel colder. Not physically, but something else. Something hard to name. It wasn't until mid-afternoon when the mother walked into the study and saw it, a piece of paper, folded neatly under a crystal paperweight on the desk. At first, she thought it was a receipt or a list. She picked it up carelessly, then stopped. The handwriting wasn't hers. The lines were written with care, as if every word had been weighed. Before it was placed down, she read the first few lines, and her hands began to shake. She sat down slowly, her eyes locked on the page. "I was here every day. You walked past me, and I smiled. You never smiled back." The mother blinked fast, unsure what she was reading, but the note continued. "I know what perfume you wear. I know how you like your towels folded. I know which child forgets to close the fridge. I noticed everything, and no one noticed me. She kept reading, unable to stop now. The words weren't angry, but honest, painfully honest. There was no blame, just truth, soft, steady truth that landed like weight on the chest. By the time she reached the last line, she was no longer blinking. Tears welled in her eyes, slow and real. I wasn't just the maid, I was a human being. And I loved this house, even when it didn't love me back. The note dropped from her hands, floated like a leaf to the floor. The room was silent, but inside her chest, it wasn't. A storm had begun. She called out to her daughter, her voice thin and familiar. When the girl entered the room, the mother handed her the note without a word. The daughter read it standing still, her eyes wide. When she finished, she sat down on the edge of the chair and whispered, "Where is she?" No one had an answer. The father came in next, saw them both quiet, holding a single page of paper. He read the note too. And for the first time in a long time, he had no words. That night, the house was quiet in a different way, not peaceful. Empty. The kids didn't argue over the TV. The mother didn't scroll through her phone during dinner. The father didn't answer his work calls. They ate in silence. And when the youngest asked, "Where's the lady who makes the toast?" no one answered. After dinner, the daughter went to the maid's small basement room. She had never been down there before. She opened the door slowly. It was clean, neat, quiet. The bed was made. Nothing left behind except a small paper on the desk, a list of cleaning supplies and the week's to-do tasks, but no clothes, no bag, nothing personal. She was gone. In her absence, the family noticed everything she had done. The laundry didn't get folded. The counters didn't sparkle. The plants started to droop. The floors felt dusty under bare feet. And slowly, regret started to settle. Not just for the work that had gone undone, but for the kindness that had never been shown. For the years they had lived beside someone and never truly seen her. The daughter went back to the note and read it again, this time aloud. Her voice cracked halfway through. And when she finished, her mother took the paper and whispered, "She was here every day, and we didn't even see her." That night Elena was gone, but her voice, the one they never asked to hear, filled the house. Not loud, not angry, just steady, soft and unforgettable. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the family drove across town. They followed the address from the small card they had found near the river's edge. None of them spoke much during the ride. There was a mix of hope and nervousness in the air. No one knew what they would find at the end of the drive, but each of them knew they had to go. The building wasn't fancy. It looked like an old school converted into a center. A small sign near the entrance read, "Women's Resource Shelter, Job Help, Housing, and Hope." There were a few people standing outside, chatting and holding small boxes of donated clothes. It wasn't a place built with money, but it was built with care. You could feel it in the way people smiled at each other. The daughter stepped forward with the envelope in her hands. She walked to the front desk and asked gently, "Hi, does someone named Elena work here?" The woman behind the desk looked up and smiled. "Elena?" "Yes, she volunteers on weekends and runs the late afternoon workshops." The daughter's hands gripped the letter tighter. "Is she here now?" The woman looked around, then nodded. "She's out back helping sort winter coats." The mother, father, and their kids followed the woman through the building. They passed rooms filled with quiet laughter and shelves stacked with second-hand shoes and blankets. Everything felt warm in a way their own home hadn't felt in a long time. When they reached the back room, they stopped in the doorway. There she was, Elena, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, sleeves rolled up, folding jackets into neat piles. She was talking to another woman, her voice soft, calm, just like they remembered. She hadn't seen them yet for a moment. They just watched her, doing something that mattered, in a place where people saw her, not as the maid, but as a person, someone important. The youngest stepped forward first. He waved slowly and said, "Hi." Elena looked up, and her hands froze. Her eyes widened for a moment, not in fear, but in surprise. Then she smiled gently, the way she always used to. "Hello," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The daughter stepped forward, her voice shaking just a little. We found your note," Alina nodded slowly. "I hoped you would." The mother walked closer, holding the envelope. "We wanted to give you this, if that's okay." Alina looked down at the letter, then back at their faces. Her eyes were kind, but cautious. She took the envelope carefully and held it in both hands. "We didn't come here to ask you for anything," the father said softly. "We just wanted to tell you. Thank you, and we're sorry." There was a pause, long and quiet. Alina didn't speak right away. She looked at them, really looked, for the first time. They weren't rushing, demanding, or ignoring. They were still waiting, listening. "I left," she said, "because I didn't feel seen, not as a worker, as a person." The daughter nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know that now, and I wish I had known sooner." Alina looked down at the envelope again, then said, "Thank you for coming here. I didn't expect it, but it means something." The boy held out a small piece of toast wrapped in foil. "I tried to make it like you did," he said shyly. She smiled and took it, laughing gently. "It's perfect," she said, even before tasting it. They didn't stay long, just a few minutes. But in those minutes, something real passed between them, a soft, quiet healing. Not everything was fixed, but something had opened before they left. The mother asked, "Would it be okay if we helped here sometime? Not to bother you, just to do something good." Alina paused, then nodded. "This place always needs extra hands." And with that, they said goodbye, not with pain, but with peace. As they walked back to the car, the sun was warm, the air light. The daughter looked back one last time and saw Alina waving gently from the doorway. She waved back with a full heart. On the drive home, no one said much, but no one needed to, because now they all understood something they hadn't before. That seeing someone means more than just looking. It means listening, noticing, respecting, and finally, they saw her, not as just the maid, but as Alina, a woman who had changed their lives with one quiet note. Weeks passed after the visit to the shelter. The house slowly began to feel different, not because Alina had returned, but because they had, in their own quiet way, started to change. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about awareness, about seeing the world around them with clearer eyes. They didn't rush to hire another maid, not because no one could replace Alina's work, but because no one could replace her presence. They realized now that she hadn't just cleaned their home. She had brought calm care and a silent kind of love into every room she touched. The mother began folding laundry herself. At first, the towels were wrinkled, uneven, but she kept trying. One day, she found herself folding the corners in the same way Alina used to, neat and tight. And something about that simple motion made her smile. The daughter volunteered twice a week at the same shelter. She didn't ask Alina for help or attention. She just worked, handing out warm meals, sorting coats, helping children find shoes that fit. Sometimes she saw Alina from a distance. They'd exchange a quiet nod, a soft smile. No words were needed. It was enough. One evening, the father came home from work with an idea. He sat down with the family and said, "I've been thinking, what if we created something in her name?" The daughter looked up, curious. "A scholarship," he said, "for women like her, women who work hard but are never seen." They loved the idea. They reached out to the shelter director, who was moved by the gesture. Within a few weeks, a small fund was set up. It wasn't huge, but it could cover a training course, a semester of classes, or even rent for a woman starting fresh, and they called it the Alina Fund. They didn't tell her right away. They wanted it to be real first, not a grand gesture, but a lasting one. And when they finally did tell her, it was quiet and simple, just like her. They handed her a printed flyer. She read it slowly, then looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. The daughter replied, "No, but we wanted to, because you mattered." Alina hugged her gently. It wasn't long, but it was full of everything that had once been left unsaid. Later that week, the family placed a small framed copy of her note in the hallway by the front door. Not hidden, not folded, framed. The very same note that once made their hearts sink now reminded them to stay awake, to see that people who are easy to overlook. Visitors would sometimes pause and read it. They'd ask, "Who wrote this?" And the mother would smile and say, "Someone who changed how we live." The youngest child, still learning, still growing, once told his friend at school, "We had someone in our house who helped more than we knew. She didn't shout, she didn't complain, she just helped us. And we didn't say thank you until it was too late." One day, during a quiet evening, the family gathered for dinner. There was no special event, no guests, just the five of them, sitting around the table. The food was simple: roasted chicken, warm bread, fresh salad. The daughter lit a candle in the center, just like Elena used to for special occasions. They held hands for a moment before eating, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for second chances. Gratitude for quiet voices that still find a way to be heard. That night, as the stars lit up the sky above the house, no one said Elena's name, but they all felt her in the room, in the way they spoke with care, in the way they listened, in the way they finally saw each other, and everyone around them. Clearly, Elena didn't return to their home as a maid. She didn't need to. She had already left something that would never leave. Her kindness had echoed through the walls. Her silence had spoken louder than all the noise in the world. And her note, the one they almost didn't read, became a beginning, not an ending, because sometimes it takes just one quiet voice to change a whole house. One simple letter to open hearts, and one person, once called just the Maid, to show what it truly means to be seen.